Addison Wiggin once said, "The petrodollar system breaking down, where oil is no longer paid for in dollars internationally, essentially will be the death knell to the US dollar as the reserve currency." It means the US can't borrow with exorbitant privilege anymore, and it means the US Treasury market is set for an out-of-control interest rate spiral. Imagine this scenario. The United States mobilizes its forces to the Middle East to secure energy sources in countries like Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Iraq, among others. Then the world reacts to the US aggressive policy by joining together, not in force, but rather in limiting or getting rid of the US dollar altogether. So the US is facing a major challenge as petrodollar loses force. So what's next, you may ask? In this video, I am going to provide you my assessments as to how a change to the petrodollar will have serious economic and geopolitical ramifications that will reverberate around the world. Our show today is sponsored by Masterworks. My name is Dr. David Waralu, and you are watching Geopolitics in Conflict.
The US dollar is facing a backlash. The forefront of this is BRICS. So it has floated the idea of a common currency.
Chinese president wants oil-producing nations to stop using the US dollar in their sales to China.
The two biggest geopolitical rivals of the US want to counterbalance the dominance of the dollar worldwide, and Russia is increasingly embracing the yuan.
When countries like Iraq and Libya challenge the petrodollar system, it's one thing. The US military can dispatch them with ease. However, it's a whole other dynamic when Russia and China undermine the petrodollar system, which is happening in a big way as we speak. On January 17th of this year, the Saudi Minister of Finance, Mohammed al-Jad'an, announced that the Saudi state is open to selling oil in currencies other than the US dollar. He said, and I quote, "There are no issues with discussing how we settle our trade arrangements, whether it is in the US dollar, whether it is in the euro, whether it is in the Saudi riyal." End of quote. If the Saudi regime does indeed embrace substantial trade in currencies other than the US dollar as part of its oil export business, this will signal a shift away from the dollar as the dominant currency in global oil payments. Or, measured another way, this would signal the end of the so-called petrodollar. But how large of a shift is this? With the increasingly frequent Saudi comments about trading in non-dollar currencies, we've also seen an increasing number of pundits announcing the collapse of the dollar or the imminent implosion of the dollar's currently outsized global power. Will a shift away from the dollar in global oil trade really lead to a big relative decline in the US dollar? Probably. And eventually, but a number of other dominoes will need to fall first, most especially the domino where we call it the euro dollar. On the other hand, it would be foolish to simply dismiss the potential end of the Saudi preference for the dollar with hand waving. The end of the petrodollar will indeed weaken the US dollar, even if this would not be a moral blow in itself. Moreover, it is especially foolhardy to ignore the status of the petrodollar because that status also has geopolitical implications. Saudi comments on the dollar signal that the Saudis no longer consider its alliance with the United States to be as important as it has since the 1970s. What's not an immediate economic problem for the US regime or the dollar may nonetheless be an immediate geopolitical problem. The petrodollar system is a big reason it has gotten away with this scam for so long. In short, here is how it works. Oil is by far the largest and most strategic commodity market. For the last 50 years, virtually anyone who wanted to import oil needed US dollar to pay for it. Every country needs oil, and if a foreign country needs US dollar to buy oil, they have a compelling reason to hold large dollar reserves. This creates a huge artificial market for the US dollars and forces foreigners to soak up many of the new currency units the Fed creates. Naturally, this gives a tremendous boost to the value of the US dollar. The system has helped create a deeper, more liquid market for the dollar and US Treasuries. It also allows the United States government to keep interest rate artificially low, thereby financing enormous deficits it otherwise would be unable to. In short, the petrodollar system is the bedrock of US financial system. That's why the US government protects it so fiercely. It needs the system to survive. World leaders who have challenged the petrodollar have ended up dead. Take Saddam Hussein and Muammar Gaddafi, for example. Each led a large oil-producing country, Iraq and Libya, respectively, and both tried to sell their oil for something other than US dollar before US military interventions led to their death. Of course, there were other reasons the US toppled Saddam and Gaddafi, but protecting the petrodollar was a serious consideration at the very least. The United States government reaps an unfathomable amount of power from its racket of printing fake money out of thin air and forcing it on the world. When countries like Iraq and Libya challenged the petrodollar system, it was one thing. The US military can dispatch them with ease. However, it's a whole other dynamic when Russia and China undermine the petrodollar system, which is happening in a big way right now. Russia and China are the only countries with sophisticated enough nuclear arsenal to go toe-to-toe with the United States, up to the top of the military escalation ladder. In other words, the United States military can't attack Russia and China with impunity because they can match each move up to all-out nuclear war, the very top of the military escalation ladder. For this reason, the US is deterred from entering into a direct military conflict with Russia and China, even though they are about to strike a fatal blow to the petrodollar system. The top Russian energy official recently made it explicit. He said Russia will accept gold or Bitcoin in return for its oil. And he said, and I quote, "If they want to buy, let them pay either in hard currency, and this is gold for us. You can also trade Bitcoins," end of quote. But here is the bottom line. The petrodollar system demise appears to be imminent. It has enormous geopolitical and financial consequences that most investors don't understand. So what about the real reason for China and Russia's massive gold stash? Now, a word from our sponsor. If the world relies less on the dollar, it means one more thing: opportunity. International markets unaffected by this change will be highly desirable. For that reason, we see billionaires and hedge funds moving massive sums into alternative assets. Instead of the usual investments like stocks, Morgan Stanley said it only a few months ago. For the last 30 years, including alternative assets may have reduced your investment's volatility and increased return. In fact, one asset gained an average of 29% last year, outperforming stocks. That asset is fine art, which you can now invest in without needing millions, thanks to Masterworks. Masterworks is amazingly positioned, having already returned over $25 million to their investors last year. In fact, Masterworks sold another painting just 2 weeks ago, handing back a realized profit of 15%. That brings Masterworks to 12 exits to date, every single one returning a profit. Paintings have sold out in minutes on Masterworks. But you can get priority access just by clicking the link in the description below. Now back to our show. It's no secret that China and Russia have been stashing away as much gold as they can for many years. China is the world's largest producer and buyer of gold. Russia is number 2. Today, it's clear why China and Russia have had an insatiable demand for gold. They've been waiting for the right moment to pull the rug from beneath the petrodollar system. And now it's that moment. In the wake of the Ukraine pre-planned conflict, the United States government kicked Russia out of the dollar system and seized hundreds of billions in dollars reserves of the Russian central bank. Washington has threatened to do the same to China for years. These threats helped ensure that China cracks down on North Korea, for example, or doesn't invade Taiwan, or didn't do things or does things that the US wanted. These threats against China may be nothing but a bluff, but if the US government carried them out, as it recently did against Russia, it would be like dropping a financial nuclear bomb on Beijing. But China already had a strategy in place. China would rather not depend on an adversary like this. This is one of the main reasons it created an alternative to the petrodollar system. This system will allow anyone in the world to trade oil for gold. It will bypass the US dollar financial system and sanctions altogether. What most people do not know is that in 2017, and after years of preparations, the Shanghai International Energy Exchange launched a crude oil future contract denominated in Chinese yuan. Since then, any oil producer can sell its oil for something besides the US dollar, in this case, the Chinese yuan. There is one big issue though. Most oil producers don't want to accumulate large reserves of yuan, and China knows this. That's why China has explicitly linked the crude futures contract with the ability to convert the yuan into physical gold without touching China's official reserves. Through gold exchange in Shanghai, the world's largest physical gold market, and Hong Kong. After years of growth and working out the kinks, the INA Yuan oil future contract is now ready for prime time. And here comes the perfect moment. Russia is the world's largest energy producer. China is the world's largest energy importer. And Russia is Beijing's largest oil supplier. And now the United States has banned Russia from the dollar system. There is an urgent need for a credible system capable of handling hundreds of billions worth of oil sales outside of the US dollar and financial system. The Shanghai International Energy Exchange is that system. Other countries on Washington's naughty list are enthusiastically signing up. For example, Iran, another major oil producer, accepts yuan as payments. So do Venezuela, Nigeria, and others. Even Saudi Arabia, the linchpin of the petrodollar system, is flirting in the open with China about selling its oil in yuan. One way or another, and probably soon, the Chinese will find a way to compel the Saudis to accept the yuan. China is already the world's largest oil importer. Moreover, the amount of oil it imports continues to grow as it fuels an economy of over 1.4 billion people, more than 4 times larger than the United States. The sheer size of the Chinese market makes it impossible for Saudi Arabia and other oil exporters to ignore China's demand to pay in yuan indefinitely. The Shanghai International Energy Exchange further sweetens the deal for oil exporter. Think about it. An oil-producing country has two choices. Option one, the petrodollar, the dismal financial situation of the United States guarantees the dollar will lose significant purchasing power. Plus, there is enormous political risk. Oil producers are exposed to the whim of the US government, which can confiscate their money whenever it wants, as it recently did to Russia. Option 2. Shanghai International Energy Exchange. Here, an oil producer can participate in the world's largest market and try to capture more market shares. It can also easily convert and repatriate its proceeds into physical gold, an international form of money with no political risk. From the perspective of an oil producer, the choice is no-brainer, even though most people have not realized it yet. It marks the end of the petrodollar system and a new monetary era. A lot of oil money, hundreds of billions of dollars, and perhaps trillions, that would typically flow through banks in US dollars into US treasuries will instead flow through Shanghai into yuan and gold. We could also see countries using Bitcoin to pay for oil, as the top Russian energy official recently suggested. The geopolitics of the petrodollar will have an effect one way or another. The more obvious short-term effect of the move away from the petrodollar will be in geopolitics rather than in the currency order. In addition to signaling that it is no longer wedded to the dollar, Saudi Arabia has also recently announced its openness towards Russia and willingness to join the Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, known as BRICS nations. This shift in strategic interest for Saudi Arabia potentially poses an immediate threat to the US strategic interest, in that the United States regime has become accustomed to dominating the entire Persian Gulf region through the US-Saudi ties. A Saudi turn away from the petrodollar will magnify this shift. That will be enough to further threaten the American standard of living, but not enough in itself to end the dollar. After all, the pound sterling did not cease to exist after its own fall from its vaunted possession as the preferred gold reserve currency, but it did become far less powerful. The dollar is headed in the same direction. So what happens next, you may ask? If there is one person who knows greatly about the international monetary system, is none other than Dr. Ron Paul. He once gave a speech called and I put this in quote, the end of the dollar hegemony, end of quote, where he pointed out that one thing that would precipitate the US dollar collapse. Here is the relevant part, and I put it in quote. The economic law that honest exchange demands only things of real value as currency cannot be replaced. The chaos that one day will ensue from our experiments with worldwide fiat money will require a return to money of real value. We will know that day is approaching when oil-producing countries demand gold or its equivalent for their oil rather than dollars or euros. The sooner, the better. End of quote. So here is the bottom line. China, Russia, and other countries will ditch the dollar and use yuan, gold, and potentially Bitcoin to trade oil. It will be the end of the petrodollar system, and it is imminent. For over 50 years, the petrodollar system has allowed the United States government and many Americans to live way beyond their means. The US takes this unique possession for granted, but it will soon disappear. There will be a lot of extra dollars floating around, suddenly looking for a home now that they are not needed to purchase oil. As a result, I expect inflation to skyrocket and a financial earthquake of historic proportion. While I am optimistic by nature, I have to call it as I see it. The economic trajectory is troubling. Unfortunately, there is little any individual can practically do to change the course of these economic and geopolitical trends in motion. The best you can do and should do is to stay informed so you can protect yourself in the best way possible and even profit from the situation. As always, prepare yourself for changing the world order. Till next time. Bye-bye.